Asset management. So first off, I just want to emphasize asset management is a foundational security control. If you're not effectively managing your assets, your security program is inherently ineffective. And another way to say that is you can't secure what you don't know exists or you're not aware of, right? So having a good understanding of your assets is a primary thing. So, and this typically translates into an asset inventory. Okay. Now, let me step back and make a meta point about policies and how they relate to controls. So you might have a control in your SOC 2 or in ISO that's, all inventory or all assets are part of an inventory and have owners. I believe that's the ISO language. Let me double check that what we're talking. An inventory of information and other associated assets, including owners, should be developed. So ISO specifically calls out that they want ownership in your asset inventory. If you look at something like the CIS benchmark controls, it's even more granular. They have more requirements around what they think should be in a good asset inventory. But bottom line is any, specifically hardware device, you should have that in inventory and you should be tracking what you have. And, ideally you would do it on like a software level as well, or, a cloud system level as well, just so you can keep track of things. Now, it's one thing to have the inventory, but what a policy does is it sets the rules and requirements that you shall have it. So it makes that control much stronger than just having the inventory itself. It says, hey, I have an inventory, and then I have a policy that says, hey, I will maintain an inventory. That's it. So inventory of assets, don't take that out. You want that control. If you want to make it more robust or more rigorous or have more requirements in the policy, feel free and do that. But this is kind of a baseline that will be fine for SOC 2 and ISO. We also say that it's owned, okay? Ownership of assets. Return of the assets. So to maintain security of the information, when someone quits or is terminated, you need to get that asset back, or, that becomes like a risk point where that information can be compromised traditionally. Now, that being said, this is a place where you can be more creative, or you could have more flexibility in the control, because at the end of the day, this is an information security program. And whether or not you care about that hardware asset, that's more of a decision that each organization can make. So some organizations, they invest in, nice laptops, they want those back, right? That's fine. But if you're talking about your customer, right, they just want to make sure that the data is not being breached from that asset. And so another organization might say, you know what, we're going to give new laptops to everyone. We don't really care about, the $1,000 we paid for that laptop. Just going to write that off anyway. And so we don't actually care if we get it back. If that is the case, you could do something else, like use a very robust mobile device management tool where you can remote lock, remote wipe the device. And if you can delete the data, then you might not care about the asset. Maybe you're going to let the employee keep it or something like that. That would be totally fine. So the important thing here is the return of the asset with respect to how it affects the data security. Good. And if you do want the person to return the asset, you should have a business process that supports that, that's reasonable. It can be more challenging, obviously, in a remote work type environment. But, if you say you're going to get it back, you should have a reasonable process to do so. Okay. Acceptable use of assets. So this is where you set rules around, what people are allowed to do. This is, again, a very standard control. We've, templatized this in the information security policy, and we don't like to have redundant policies, so we just do a reference to it here. If you prefer to have your AU, your acceptable use policy either in this document or as a standalone document, you can slice and dice these however you want. Okay, good.
Matt, quick question. I know I've seen some questions come in from customers about maybe they have a purchase program where a team member, when they leave the company or at some point in the life of owning that asset, they can then buy it from Vanta, for example. How does something like that fall into this policy?
Yeah, good question. So that's totally fine. You just want to make sure that if you're going to sell the laptop to the employee or let them keep it, that you have a defensible way, a control to make sure sensitive data is not either on the laptop or accessible through the laptop when you give it to them. So there's like various anecdotes that people have put out there. I'm not going to name names, but there was like a big bank and they were using a third-party vendor to destroy their assets. And the vendor really wasn't doing that properly. And they like someone bought like an old laptop at Goodwill, and lo and behold, it's like, big bank XYZ, some spreadsheet of their customers and their data, something like that. That's what you're trying to avoid by having a good rigorous program to get rid of any sensitive data that's on the laptop or access to it. Okay. Now, one thing, let me point out, if you're an ISO customer, there is a specific ISO control in the Annex A called return of assets. Personnel or other interested parties to return all the organization's assets in their possession upon change or termination of their employment contract or agreement. Okay. For those who haven't dug into ISO yet, these controls are scopable based on risk. That's what the statement of applicability is for. So just because there's a control in the Annex A doesn't mean you have to do it. And so if you had an environment where you're going to remote wipe that laptop and let the employee keep it, you could just scope that control out of your statement of applicability and or write an alternate control. Okay. Let's go with loss or theft of assets. So there should be control around the protection of physical devices off site. Because obviously if someone steals your laptop from Starbucks, that's an information security risk. So we again reference a separate policy here. If you want to put some control activities around that, that's fine. Oftentimes that is just a policy where you tell employees that they're responsible and they need to use common sense and like not leave their device unsecured, something like that. Oftentimes that's all you can practically do. Okay. Asset disposal and reuse, again, kind of similar to what we've been talking about. The interest here is that you don't have a vector for breaching sensitive information. Best practices here are to do some sort of wipe. Here we reference like a NIST guideline on sanitation. That's just a templated policy that's absolutely not required. So if you're not wiping to that standard, you can delete that, and you can you can put in whatever your own reasonable standard is. And then oftentimes if you're using an MDM, this is like a functionality built into that, you can leverage that. Good. Laptop workstation security. So this is just setting the rules, which we're going to actually technically enforce so that it's clear on what's the expectation around the device security. And again, this is like I said earlier, we could just do the device security, but it's stronger if we also back it up with a policy statement, because we're setting that as a formal rule in our environment and setting that as the expectation. Exceptions and violations, that's it. There we go.